Fiona Bruce has covered many stories during her career as a journalist, but tonight she's going back to investigate the one she says has stuck with her like no other.
It's been more than 25 years since Rachel Nickell, aged just 23, was brutally murdered in a park in broad daylight. Rachel was sexually assaulted and stabbed 49 times in front of her 2-year-old son Alex, the only witness to her murder. The toddler was later found by her body repeating the words, "Wake up, mummy. We met Alex last year, then 27.
I was grabbed and thrown roughly to the ground, my face dragged across the mud, and seconds later, my mother collapsed next to me.
The case shocked and horrified the nation, and a local man, Colin Stagg, soon became the prime suspect. Meanwhile, Rachel's real murderer, Robert Napper, remained at large and killed again. Colin Stagg was tried for murder in 1994, but the case collapsed with Justice Harry Ognall criticising the police for deceptive conduct of the grossest kind. Rachel's real killer was convicted 16 years after her death.
Well, Fiona Bruce is here now alongside the man who defended Colin Stagg, Jim Sturman QC, and good morning to both of you. So, Fiona, you were a young BBC reporter. It was your first murder trial, but you say it holds a particular significance for you. There were things that happened there that shocked you.
It does, and that's why I wanted to make the programme. So I was, as you say, a junior reporter. I went to see the investigating officer, or one of the investigating officers, and for reasons best known to him, he decided to sort of throw across his desk towards me photographs of Rachel's body.
Oh, God.
And this is a young woman who'd been stabbed 49 times. Now, he shouldn't have done it. It was a terrible violation of her privacy. And short of closing my eyes, there's no way I could not see them. And I defy anyone to forget seeing images like that. I mean, I see terrible things in the job I do in the newsroom, but that was so shocking. I was only in my mid-20s, and I've never forgotten it.
And it was, I mean, the image of her was everywhere, and it was the story, the nature of this story that just seemed to sort of grip hold of people, really. Why do you think that was so much?
Well, I think partly because she was so beautiful. And as well as I do, the press loves to put an image of a beautiful woman on the front page, and she was so gorgeous. And I think that the landmark horror, an unusual horror, thankfully, of being killed next to her toddler, as you know, because I know he's come on this programme.
Right,
So that just... And in a place like Wimbledon Common, which is such a lovely, safe environment. I think people were just nationally appalled by it.
The Met were under an immense pressure for a conviction, weren't they?
Yes, I mean, Colin was the 31st person arrested. That's a statistic that's not trotted out very often. And they were desperate. The officer who finally was in charge of the case gave a press conference saying there'd never been a murder unsolved on his patch. And just before he retired, Colin was charged.
And it was this criminal profiling, and this was the first time that this had been used in court, was the reason that his face fit.
Well, his face fitted according to the psychological profiler, but the problem with psychological profiling is it's based on a series of generalisations, any one of which, if it's wrong, you go down the wrong path. And one of the parts of the psychological profile was that the killer would be local, but the killer wasn't local. The killer was from southeast London, and because Colin was in prison for 13 months for a crime he didn't commit, Napper went on to kill a woman and her baby on the second time he committed murder.
And that's the real
So when you met Colin Stagg, you're going to defend him, walking to meet him for the first time. What sort of a man was he?
Well, I first met him in the magistrates' court. I was instructed by Ian Ryan, who was then at a firm called Russell Cook, and they sent me down to the magistrates' court, and I met him in the cells. And from the moment I met him, he just struck me as someone who's bemused by the position he was in. He didn't once display to us any indication to violence or anything. He just went through the whole process completely bemused. The only time he was ever under stress was when he believed his dog had died. And I had to go down to the kennels at Staines, where the dog was then being held, with a camera, because in those days no one had a camera phone, and hold that day's newspaper up with me, with my arm around his dog Brandy, and take it to Colin that night at Wandsworth to get him back on track.
And it was hard for him to ever really get a fair trial because of the fact that it was so media heavy. Everybody knew who he was, everybody knew his image, everybody knew these stories about him. And you say that the collusion between the press and the police at that time was unhealthy,
it was,
to the least.
It was disgraceful. They've just abolished the second part of the Leveson inquiry, but the police let the journalists know that Colin had supposedly confessed when he hadn't, that he'd been identified and had admitted being on the common when he did not admit it. The identifications of Colin were mistaken. It was Napper that had come from south-east London to south-west London to kill her. And sadly, the police briefed, as we've heard from Fiona, and created a series of prejudicial observations about Colin. I mean, to show Fiona the photographs, I mean, those photographs still live with me. I only saw them once. And to show them to journalists is for only one reason at all, and that's to build up a press motivation to go against somebody who the police believe was guilty.
And then of course, there was the honey trap, a woman police officer. He was a lonely man. She started writing to him.
Well, I mean, the thing is, the nightmare about the honey trap was that he was Colin, who had never had a physical relationship with a woman, and she held out the promise that that would be forthcoming, but the only way it would be forthcoming, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, is if he provided her with confessions about the kind of violent, murderous sexual behaviour that attracted her, and he couldn't. You know, and you know, he was doing everything really to get him to confess to having murdered Rachel Nickell, and he just wouldn't.
And for the documentary, you spoke to him about that, didn't you? And what did he say about that?
Well, it was rather heartbreaking because the only time he found out that this woman that he confessed his greatest fantasies to, and made up quite a lot of fantasies as well in order to try and keep her happy and hopefully, you know, have sex with her, basically. He was then questioned by the police, and in walks this undercover officer, and suddenly he realises she's not a person who wants to be his girlfriend, she's actually a copper. And, you know, you'd think he'd be angry, mortified, embarrassed. And he said, well, you know, I just thought, oh, that's why. You know, I'm not a very attractive guy, and I guess it makes sense now, which is kind of heartbreaking.
Yeah, it is.
You also went back to him for the documentary. You went back with him to the estate. We've got a little clip here.
One of the reasons you came to the police's attention was Crime Watch.
Yeah.
Did you watch that Crime Watch that evening?
I saw bits and pieces of it. I wasn't that overly interested in it. And then they brought out this photo of the guy with the short hair that people said looked like me and stuff.
Did you think he looked like you?
I didn't think it did at all, you know, but apparently a lot of people around here thought he did.
You say there was almost in your words, a Zen-like quality.
Well, he's utterly unbitter about it. That's not a very grammatical way to put it, but he's looking forward, he's not looking back. And the thing that you don't see from going around the estate was that, and you said that he had a lot of friends on that estate, and when we went back, this is, you know, 25 years later, people saying, oh, hi, Cole, how you doing? We miss you. I mean, he had a lot of friends there. So this monster that he was portrayed as being, he wasn't. You know, he absolutely wasn't, and I saw that with my own eyes when I went back there.
And this got under your skin as well.
Oh, yeah, the case still lives with me now. I mean, it's amazing to think it's nearly, well, it's 23 years ago. On the morning of the trial, a card arrived signed by almost 200 people on the estate wishing him good luck.
Is that right?
So the people on the estate, apart from those who had somehow been prejudiced by the police into... one lady gave a statement saying that he'd obviously washed that morning because he was wearing a clean T-shirt, hinting that perhaps he'd washed the blood off when he wasn't guilty.
The thing is, you were the one... You were the team that stood between Colin and going down for life.
Absolutely. I mean, if the case had got to a jury, we have little doubt that the jury would have been so prejudiced against him that he would have been convicted. In this case, there was a perceptible shift towards a presumption of guilt rather than what there should be, a presumption of innocence.
And of course, the spotlight was on him, which allowed Napper to, as you said at the beginning of our interview, to kill again.
What's extraordinary about Colin is he holds no bitterness. I mean, it was awful that he spent 13 months in prison for a crime he did not commit, but the real tragedy was that Samantha Bissett and her child were killed whilst Colin was in custody.
We spoke to the Metropolitan Police. The spokesman said, we've apologised for the failings of the investigation into Rachel Nickell's death. We accept that more could have been done to prevent a number of very serious attacks carried out by Robert Napper. Since the murder of Rachel Nickell, we've changed how we investigate murders. This includes the development of police training, new forensic techniques and closer liaison with the Crown Prosecution Service. The documentary that we've been talking about is Rachel Nickell, The Untold Story. It's tonight at 9 on ITV. And thank you both
very much.
for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you.